She doesn't belong here. Sarah Morgan heard the whispered words as she stepped into the pristine marble lobby of Atlantic National Bank, the most prestigious bank in the city. She was dressed in simple gray sweatpants and a plain t-shirt, her look intentionally understated. But as she walked through the doors, the stares of judgment were impossible to ignore. The polished faces of well-dressed executives glanced up for a moment, only to quickly dismiss her as just another outsider. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, raised an eyebrow as Sarah approached. Sarah, however, remained unaffected. She wasn't here to impress anyone. As she walked up to the counter, the bank manager, Rebecca Palmer, gave her an almost imperceptible sneer. "Good morning," Sarah greeted, her voice calm and polite. "I'd like to make a deposit and open a new account." Rebecca's eyes skimmed Sarah from head to toe, a slight smirk forming at the corner of her mouth. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "This is Atlantic National, not just a local credit union. We serve high-net-worth individuals." Sarah nodded, her face betraying no sign of discomfort. She quietly placed the check for $250,000 in front of Rebecca, a generous donation to her educational foundation. "This is for the Morgan Educational Foundation," Sarah explained. "We're opening a separate account for a new initiative." Rebecca took a glance at the check, her eyes narrowing. "A foundation, huh?" she muttered under her breath. "And where did this money come from?" "It was raised through our annual benefit gala," Sarah replied smoothly. "The documents are all in order." Rebecca glanced at the check again, her expression shifting from dismissive to skeptical. "I'm afraid I'll need to verify this deposit before I can proceed," she said, her voice now louder than before. "We have very strict guidelines here, and this amount is unusual for someone like you." Sarah felt a wave of heat rush to her cheeks, but she didn't flinch. "There's no need for verification. All the paperwork is in order, as I mentioned." The bank manager's voice rose again. "You don't belong here," she said, her words more cutting than before. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Sarah's heart rate remained steady as Rebecca's words echoed in her ears. She had heard this kind of thing before. People like Rebecca, people who thought wealth and appearance defined worth, always underestimated her. Sarah remained silent, her calm demeanor betraying nothing. As she turned to leave, a soft voice broke through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" A man's voice, smooth and confident, filled the air, and Sarah's eyes shifted to the entrance. Daniel Morgan, her husband, stepped through the door. His tailored navy suit fit him perfectly, his platinum watch gleaming in the sunlight. The contrast between his understated elegance and the opulence of the bank was striking. Rebecca's smile faltered as she took in his presence. Daniel walked towards Sarah with a quiet authority that made the room fall into a hushed silence. The moment he spoke, the entire bank seemed to hold its breath. "Is there a problem here, Rebecca?" he asked, his voice low but commanding. Rebecca froze, her smile faltering as she quickly tried to mask her discomfort. "Oh, Mr. Morgan, no problem at all. I was just—" But Daniel didn't wait for her to finish. "I'm afraid you've made a mistake," he said, his gaze now focused entirely on Sarah. "My wife is Sarah Morgan. She's the founder of the Morgan Educational Foundation." The room was still. Rebecca's face drained of color as the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. "Sarah Morgan?" she stammered. The Morgan Educational Foundation?" Her voice wavered, and the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Sarah didn't flinch. She simply stood there, her expression as calm as ever. Rebecca's face flushed a deep shade of crimson as she realized her mistake. She started, but her words were swallowed by the heavy silence. Daniel's voice broke through the tension. "We don't judge people based on their appearance," he said, his tone icy. "But you've just learned a valuable lesson about humility." Rebecca stammered another apology, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Sarah's calm, composed presence was the only response she needed. As the tension in the bank slowly started to settle, Sarah felt the weight of the eyes on her, but she remained composed. Daniel stood by her side, his calm presence turning the entire room's attention toward them. The bank manager, Rebecca, stood there, her face flushed with embarrassment as she fumbled with the papers on her desk, unable to meet Sarah's gaze. I didn't realize," Rebecca stammered, her voice shaky. "I had no idea who you were." Daniel's sharp gaze softened just slightly as he spoke, his tone still firm but less cold. "That's the problem, Rebecca," he said quietly. "You judged her based on nothing but appearances." A few moments of silence followed, and the tension in the room was palpable. The other bank employees exchanged uncomfortable glances, realizing they had witnessed more than just a simple mistake. The woman they had all written off as an outsider was someone they had greatly underestimated. Rebecca, now fully aware of the gravity of her actions, stood frozen, unable to say another word. Sarah, still calm, met her eyes for the first time since entering. "I came here to do good," Sarah said, her voice soft but with an edge that made it clear she wouldn't tolerate disrespect. "My foundation helps children. It's not about the money. It's about making a difference." Rebecca nodded, her face a mix of regret and shame. She opened her mouth to apologize, but the words never left her lips. Instead, Daniel stepped forward. "We came here to do business," he said, his tone final. "But this situation? It's a lesson." Sarah turned to Daniel, her husband's unwavering support exactly what she needed in that moment. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on them now, and she didn't mind. It was a reminder that appearances are never what they seem. "What matters," Sarah continued, "is respect. And you don't earn respect by looking at someone and assuming their worth." The silence in the room deepened. Rebecca finally found her voice, but it was small, apologetic. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Morgan," she said. "I'll make sure this doesn't happen again." Sarah nodded, her expression unchanged, but her eyes spoke volumes. "It better not," she said quietly, and then turned toward Daniel. The moment felt like a turning point, not just for Rebecca, but for everyone who had watched the encounter unfold. The bank's luxury setting suddenly felt insignificant in the face of Sarah's quiet authority. She didn't need to prove anything. She had already done it. And with that, the room slowly began to return to its usual hum, but the unease lingered in the air. Sarah and Daniel walked out of the bank, their footsteps echoing on the marble floors. As they left, a few bank employees lingered, still processing the power dynamic they had just witnessed. Sarah had quietly asserted her place, not through force, but through the kind of strength that wasn't always visible to the eye. They would never forget this moment, the moment they learned that wealth and status aren't always what they appear to be. As Sarah and Daniel walked out of the bank, the weight of the moment hung in the air. The crisp morning light hit the marble floors, but for Sarah, everything felt different now. She had expected her day to go like any other, focused on expanding her foundation's impact, not confronting judgment at a bank. Yet, this experience had taught her something profound. The way people judged her based on her appearance was a reflection of a bigger issue. The world often dismissed what didn't fit into their narrow view of success. Daniel, walking by her side, seemed to sense her thoughts. He gave her a brief glance before speaking. "You were calm in there," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of pride. "But I know it wasn't easy." Sarah smiled faintly, her thoughts drifting to the moment when she had been so easily dismissed by Rebecca and the others. It had stung at first, but she had learned long ago that people like Rebecca were quick to judge, especially those who didn't fit their idea of who belonged in places like Atlantic National. "It wasn't," Sarah replied, "but it was necessary." They reached their car, the sleek black SUV parked near the entrance, and as they got inside, Sarah's mind wandered back to the encounter. What bothered her most was the ease with which Rebecca had made assumptions. She had felt the eyes of the room on her, eyes that didn't see her for who she was, but for who they thought she was. As they drove through the city, Daniel's voice broke her reverie. "You're more than just the foundation, Sarah. You've built something important." Sarah nodded, but she knew that what she built was bigger than just the charity. It was a testament to all the silent women who had been overlooked, to all the quiet rebels who had something far more powerful inside them than anyone ever realized. "I know," she said, "but the foundation is where I can make a difference. That's where my focus is." Daniel reached over and gently squeezed her hand. "You make a difference every day, just by being you." His words were simple, but they resonated deeply. For years, Sarah had fought to stay true to herself in a world that constantly pushed her to conform to its standards. The quiet woman who had once felt invisible was now a force to be reckoned with. They drove through the streets, and for the first time that morning, Sarah felt the weight of her actions settle. It wasn't about making people regret underestimating her. It was about proving that respect isn't earned through appearance or wealth. It's earned through action, integrity, and standing firm in what you believe. As they reached their destination, Sarah glanced at Daniel, her partner in every sense. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, "for always being there." Daniel smiled, his eyes soft. "I'm just here to support you. You've always had the strength within you. You've just started to see it." And as they stepped out of the car, ready to face whatever came next, Sarah knew one thing for sure. She would never let anyone else define her worth. Not ever again. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls. Sarah focused on her foundation's latest initiative, helping underprivileged students gain access to higher education. But the memory of the encounter at the bank lingered. It was a reminder that even in a world driven by success and wealth, there were still people who felt entitled to judge others based on their outward appearance. She had proven her point in the bank, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the real victory lay in her continued work, not in seeking retribution. One evening, as Sarah was reviewing some documents for the foundation, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "We have a meeting tomorrow with the city council about our new scholarship fund. It's important. I'll be there." Sarah smiled at the message. Daniel had always been supportive of her mission, but he had his own empire to run. Still, he knew how important these moments were for her. The next morning, they arrived at the council meeting. The room was filled with well-dressed professionals, some of them nodding at Sarah as they took their seats. It was a familiar scene for her now, but still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. In a room full of elite decision-makers. As the meeting began, Sarah's heart raced. She had learned long ago that these moments were where she could make a difference. As the representatives discussed the allocation of city funds, Sarah raised her hand. The room fell silent as she stood up, her voice calm but resolute. "I appreciate the work that has been done, but I would like to emphasize how crucial it is for our future leaders to have access to education. We're not just talking about numbers on a budget sheet. These are lives, these are futures, and if we don't invest in them, we are failing the next generation." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was a stillness. She could feel the weight of the room's judgment, but this time, it didn't matter. She had seen how quickly people could make assumptions based on nothing but appearance, and today, she was ready to make sure her actions spoke louder than any prejudice. The council members exchanged glances, and then one by one, they nodded. Sarah's proposal was accepted. As the meeting ended, Daniel stood beside her, pride in his eyes. "You did it," he said softly. Sarah smiled. "We did it." It wasn't just about the meeting, though. It was about everything she had worked for. The world may have underestimated her, but Sarah knew that real change wasn't made by fitting into someone else's idea of success. It was made by breaking through the barriers they set and showing that true worth was never about appearances. As they walked out of the council meeting, Sarah felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She wasn't just fighting for the future of her foundation. She was fighting for a world where people like her, people who didn't fit the mold, could make an impact. And in that moment, she knew she was on the right path. Weeks passed, and Sarah found herself more focused than ever. With the city council's approval of the scholarship fund, her foundation had gained momentum, and soon, her team was making strides in empowering underprivileged youth. But as Sarah looked out over the skyline from her office, she realized that the true test was still ahead. She had proved her worth in the eyes of those who had underestimated her, but the world outside still had so much more to offer. One evening, Sarah received a call that would change everything. "Sarah, we've just been invited to speak at the National Education Summit," Daniel told her over the phone. "It's a big deal. They want to hear from you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The summit was one of the most prestigious gatherings in the country, filled with educators, leaders, and philanthropists who shaped the future of education. It was an opportunity Sarah never thought would come her way. She had always worked quietly behind the scenes, pushing her foundation's agenda without seeking the spotlight. But now, the world was asking for her. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah crafted her speech carefully, knowing that this was her chance to show the world what she had been fighting for all these years. As the day of the summit approached, the pressure mounted. She had never spoken in front of such a large crowd, and the thought of addressing so many influential people made her feel a sense of nervous excitement. On the morning of the event, Sarah arrived at the venue with Daniel by her side. The atmosphere was electric. People from all over the country filled the grand hall, exchanging ideas and discussing the future of education. Sarah felt a familiar sense of being an outsider in such a high-profile environment, but this time, it didn't faze her. She had worked hard for this moment. As she walked up to the podium, Sarah could feel the eyes of the room on her. She took a deep breath, her hands steady as she adjusted the microphone. "Good afternoon," Sarah began, her voice calm but resolute. "I'm Sarah Morgan, and I'm here today because I believe that every child deserves a chance, regardless of where they come from. For too long, we've let the system fail those who need help the most. But today, I stand before you to say that it's not too late to change that." The crowd was quiet as she spoke, her words resonating in the air. Sarah spoke from the heart, sharing her journey, how she had gone from being overlooked and underestimated to becoming a champion for those who had no voice. She talked about the struggles her foundation had faced, the kids whose lives had been changed because someone had finally believed in them. By the time she finished her speech, there was a long pause before the room erupted into applause. Sarah felt a rush of emotion, knowing that this moment was more than just a speech. It was the culmination of everything she had worked for. As she left the stage, Daniel was waiting for her, his smile wide. "You did it, Sarah. You made them listen." Sarah's heart swelled with pride, but she knew the real work was just beginning. She had taken her place in the world, not as someone who had been given a chance, but as someone who had earned it. As they walked off together, Sarah realized that the world may never stop underestimating her. But it didn't matter. She was no longer waiting for permission to succeed. She was already doing it. The weeks following the summit were a whirlwind of new opportunities. Sarah's speech had garnered attention, not just from the education sector, but from people across the country who were inspired by her story. The media began to take notice, and soon Sarah was invited to appear on national television to discuss the future of education and how her foundation was helping to shape it. It was everything she had worked for. But as she sat in the makeup chair before her first appearance, a familiar wave of doubt crept over her. She had never sought the spotlight. It was always about the work, the impact, not the recognition. But now, it felt impossible to ignore. As the lights on the set turned on and the cameras rolled, Sarah felt a surge of nervous energy. "You've got this," Daniel whispered to her from the sidelines, his presence a quiet reassurance. The host, a well-known television personality, smiled as the interview began. "Sarah, you've been an inspiration to so many. How did you go from being the underdog to making such a powerful impact?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. "I've always believed in the power of giving people a chance," she said, her voice steady. "But I've also learned that sometimes the world needs to see more than just your work. It needs to see your story, your struggle, your determination." The host nodded, clearly impressed. "Your foundation is doing incredible things, but what's next for you, Sarah?" Sarah smiled, the nerves she had felt moments before easing. "What's next is continuing to push for change. We've made a difference, but there's still so much to do. We're just getting started." The interview went smoothly, and as Sarah left the studio, she felt a sense of accomplishment. The journey had been long and difficult, but every step had led her here. She wasn't the same woman who had once been dismissed by a bank manager or looked down upon by those who thought they knew better. She had earned her place, not just in the world of philanthropy, but in the hearts and minds of those who believed in her. That night, as Sarah sat at the dinner table with Daniel, she reflected on everything that had happened. "It's not just about the work," she said softly. "It's about the people we're helping along the way. It's about changing lives." Daniel looked at her with pride in his eyes. "And you've done that, Sarah. You've changed more lives than you'll ever know." Sarah smiled, her heart full. She knew the path ahead would not always be easy, but for the first time, she felt certain of one thing. She was exactly where she was meant to be. As the months passed, Sarah found herself increasingly in the public eye. Invitations to speak at conferences, participate in panel discussions, and share her story were flooding in. It was a strange sensation for someone who had once preferred to stay behind the scenes, working tirelessly in the background. But with each new opportunity, Sarah found herself growing into a role she never thought she would take on, one of a public figure, a beacon of change. One evening, after another long day of meetings, Sarah sat at her desk, the city lights twinkling outside the window. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Daniel. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice warm and concerned. Sarah smiled, grateful for his constant support. I'm doing well, she replied. Just trying to figure out the next steps. There's so much more I want to do, but sometimes I wonder if I'm ready for it. Daniel walked over and sat beside her. You've been ready for this for a long time, Sarah. It's not about being perfect. It's about doing what you believe in, and you've been doing that every day. His words comforted her more than she expected. For a moment, she simply sat in silence, reflecting on everything that had happened. The bank, the summit, the interviews, and the countless hours spent making her foundation's vision a reality. She had fought for so long to be heard, to be taken seriously, and now, her voice was being recognized. But despite all the progress, she knew there was still so much to be done. I know you're right, she said, her voice steady. But sometimes it feels like I'm just scratching the surface. Daniel nodded, understanding. That's the nature of it, he said. You make a difference in the lives of the people you help, but there's always more work to be done, and you're not doing it alone. Sarah looked at him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Thank you, she said quietly, for always being here. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. I'll always be here, Sarah. You're not just changing the world, you're changing yourself. And I'm proud of you every step of the way. The next morning, Sarah woke up with renewed determination. She had spent so much time focusing on the foundation, but now, it was time to focus on expanding her vision. The world was full of untapped potential, and Sarah knew she was just getting started. She had proven her worth, not just in the eyes of those who had doubted her, but in her own heart. And as she prepared to tackle the next phase of her journey, Sarah knew one thing for certain. She was ready to take on whatever came next. The road ahead would be challenging, but it was a challenge she was more than prepared for. As the foundation grew, so did Sarah's influence. What had started as a small initiative to help disadvantaged youth had turned into a movement. Her story, once dismissed as just another tale of an underdog overcoming adversity, had now become a beacon of hope for many. The media continued to spotlight her, and soon, Sarah was being approached by other philanthropists, eager to collaborate with her on similar projects. But despite all the attention, Sarah never lost sight of her original mission. She continued to prioritize the work over the accolades, focusing on expanding the foundation's reach. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in her office, a message popped up on her phone. It was from an influential senator who had been following her progress. Sarah, I've been impressed by your work and would like to discuss a potential partnership to bring educational resources to underserved communities nationwide. Could we meet? Sarah's heart raced. This was exactly the kind of opportunity that could take her foundation to the next level. She immediately replied, agreeing to meet the senator in person. The next day, Sarah found herself sitting across from the senator in a sleek office building in Washington, D.C. The senator, a woman in her late 50s with a commanding presence, smiled as she extended her hand. Sarah, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Sarah shook her hand firmly, her nerves momentarily fading. The pleasure is mine, she replied. I've been following your work and am excited about the possibilities. The senator wasted no time getting to the point. I believe we can work together to create a nationwide program that provides educational opportunities for children in low-income areas. Your foundation has already made a tremendous impact, and I think with the right support, we can take this to a much larger scale. Sarah felt a surge of excitement. This was the breakthrough she had been hoping for, the chance to make a lasting impact on a national level. But she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. I'm honored by the opportunity, Sarah said. But it's important to me that we stay true to the mission we've built, putting children first and ensuring that the resources go where they are most needed. The senator nodded, clearly impressed by Sarah's conviction. I respect that, she said. This will be a partnership based on shared values, and we'll ensure that the right people benefit. As they continued to discuss the details of the partnership, Sarah felt a sense of pride. She had worked tirelessly to get to this point, and now, she was at the table with some of the most influential figures in the country, ready to take her vision to new heights. When the meeting ended, Sarah stepped out of the building with a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges ahead were daunting, but she was no longer the woman who had been overlooked or dismissed. She had found her voice, and now, the world was listening. As she made her way back to her car, she realized that the journey was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. And no matter what, She was ready to face whatever came next. As Sarah sat at her desk that evening, a wave of gratitude washed over her. She had come so far, and yet, the journey was only beginning. The meeting with the senator had been a turning point. The potential partnership was more than just an opportunity for growth. It was a chance to reshape the future of education for so many children who had been overlooked. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her vision was starting to become a reality. But as she gazed out the window at the city lights, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It wasn't the work, it was the time. The foundation, the media appearances, the speeches, everything had taken so much of her focus. And in the process, she had neglected the very thing that had driven her from the start, her personal life. Sarah reached for her phone and dialed Daniel's number. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, what's up?" he asked, his voice filled with warmth. "I've been thinking," Sarah began. "I've been so caught up in everything lately. Maybe we should take a weekend off, just the two of us. Get away from all this for a while." Daniel paused for a moment, then chuckled softly. "That sounds perfect. I think we both deserve it." Sarah smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing. The demands of her work were important, but it was time to reconnect with the people who mattered most. A few days later, Sarah and Daniel found themselves on a quiet beach in California. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was soothing, a stark contrast to the buzzing energy of the city. For the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself to simply relax. She and Daniel spent their days walking along the beach, talking about everything and nothing. They laughed, reminisced about old memories, and dreamed about the future. It was a reminder that no matter how far her career had taken her, the most important things in life, love, connection, and peace, were always within reach. That evening, as the sun set, Sarah and Daniel sat on the beach, watching the sky turn from orange to pink to purple. Sarah leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence. "I needed this," she said quietly. Daniel kissed the top of her head. "I know you did." The next morning, as they boarded their flight back home, Sarah felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in a long time. The world would still be there when they returned, the work would still be waiting, but for now, she was exactly where she needed to be. The future of the foundation, the partnership with the senator, the children she was helping, it was all important. But Sarah now understood that balancing it all meant making time for the things that grounded her, for the people who reminded her of why she started in the first place. As the plane ascended into the sky, Sarah looked out the window, knowing that whatever came next, she was ready. She had built something meaningful, something that would last. And now, with her heart full and her focus sharpened, she could continue the work on her terms. As the months flew by, Sarah's foundation continued to thrive, and her influence in the education sector grew even more. The senator's partnership had opened doors to new opportunities, and the momentum she had built was undeniable. Yet, amid the success, Sarah began to realize something crucial. Despite all the progress, there was still much to be done. One evening, while reviewing reports in her office, Sarah received a call from a longtime mentor, a woman she had looked up to for years. "Sarah, how are you?" The mentor's voice was warm and reassuring. "I've been watching your progress, and I'm impressed, but there's something I think you need to consider." Sarah leaned back in her chair, intrigued. "What is it?" she asked. "You're doing incredible work, but the world is going to expect more from you now," her mentor said gently. "You can't just focus on the foundation. You have the power to shape entire systems. Have you thought about running for office?" Sarah was silent for a moment, the weight of the suggestion sinking in. Running for office had never crossed her mind. She had always felt more at home in the background, working directly with communities, shaping policies from behind the scenes. But now, with everything she had built, the idea felt both daunting and exhilarating. "I've always felt my impact was greater in the community, on the ground," Sarah replied slowly. "But maybe I've been limiting myself." Her mentor's voice was firm. "You've done more than just help people. You've changed lives. And now, you have the chance to help change policies that affect millions. The time might be right." The conversation lingered in Sarah's mind long after the call ended. She had always believed in the power of community, but her mentor's words struck a chord with her. Perhaps this was the next step. With a growing foundation and a newfound sense of confidence, Sarah had the opportunity to take her mission even further. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Politics was a tough world, and the scrutiny would be intense. But Sarah had faced challenges before, and each time, she had emerged stronger. She stood in front of the mirror later that night, contemplating the path ahead. The weight of the decision wasn't lost on her, but something deep inside told her that this was the right move. The next morning, Sarah sat down with Daniel, ready to share her thoughts. "I've been thinking about something," she began, her voice steady. "What if I ran for office?" Daniel looked at her, his eyes soft, but filled with understanding. "I think you'd be amazing," he said, his support unwavering. "You've always been someone who fights for what's right. If this is the next step for you, I'll be with you every step of the way." With Daniel's encouragement, Sarah made the decision. She would run. The road ahead was unknown, filled with challenges and obstacles, but Sarah was no longer the woman who had been overlooked. She had built something incredible, and now, she was ready to fight for a larger platform to continue her mission. As she prepared to announce her candidacy, Sarah knew that the real work was just beginning. But for the first time, she felt ready for anything. As Sarah announced her candidacy for office, the response was overwhelming. The media quickly picked up on the story, and soon, news outlets were buzzing with headlines about the woman who had gone from underdog to political contender. The campaign trail was a whirlwind of speeches, debates, and community events. Everywhere she went, people recognized her, not just as the woman who had changed lives through her foundation, but as someone who was ready to bring that same passion and determination to public office. At first, the experience was a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Sarah had always been driven by the work itself, but now she had to find a way to balance that with the demands of running a campaign. There were meetings with advisors, strategists, and fundraisers, all of whom pushed her to embrace the politics of the game. It was a side of the world she had never truly been a part of, and at times, it felt foreign. Yet, she refused to compromise her values. "I'm not here to play politics," she told Daniel one evening after a long day on the campaign trail. "I'm here to do what's right for the people." Daniel, ever supportive, smiled and took her hand. "And that's exactly why you'll win, Sarah. Because you're not like them." Despite the pressure, Sarah's resolve remained unshaken. She traveled across the state, meeting with voters, listening to their concerns, and offering solutions that resonated with their daily struggles. She didn't sugarcoat her proposals or promise things she couldn't deliver. She spoke honestly about the challenges they faced and how she intended to work with them to overcome them. It wasn't about winning their votes. It was about earning their trust. As the campaign progressed, Sarah found herself facing tough opponents who tried to undermine her with their own tactics. They questioned her experience, her background, and even her motivations. But Sarah didn't flinch. She stood tall, focused on the issues that mattered most. The more they tried to tear her down, the stronger her message became. The people responded. They saw through the attacks and recognized her for what she truly was, a woman who had spent her life fighting for change. Weeks turned into months, and the election day approached. The final stretch of the campaign was a blur of late nights, endless speeches, and countless handshakes. But through it all, Sarah remained grounded. She knew that no matter the outcome, she had already achieved something incredible. She had proven to herself, and to the world, that she was more than just a woman with a cause. She was a force to be reckoned with. On the night before the election, Sarah stood on the balcony of her campaign headquarters, looking out at the city lights. She thought about everything she had been through to get to this point, every setback, every challenge, every moment of doubt. And yet, here she was, ready to face the next chapter of her journey. No matter the results tomorrow, Sarah knew one thing for certain. She had already won. The night of the election was tense, filled with anticipation and anxiety. As Sarah sat in the campaign headquarters, surrounded by her team, the weight of the moment settled heavily on her shoulders. The results were coming in slowly, each announcement adding to the mounting pressure. Sarah had spent months on the trail, giving everything she had to connect with the voters, to prove that she was more than just a woman with a foundation. She was someone who understood their struggles, someone who would fight for their future. As the hours passed, Sarah found herself unable to sit still. She paced back and forth, her mind racing with thoughts of what might come next. Daniel, who had been by her side every step of the way, watched her with a calm, steady gaze. "You've done everything you can," he reminded her softly. "No matter what happens, you've already made a difference." Sarah nodded, but the doubt still lingered. She had given everything for this campaign, and the thought of it all being for nothing was almost too much to bear. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from her mentor. No matter the outcome, Sarah, you've shown the world what's possible. Your journey has inspired so many, and that's a victory in itself. Sarah read the message and felt a small sense of relief. Her mentor was right. This campaign had already been a success in many ways. But still, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was so much more at stake. Hours later, the first major announcement came in. The results from the largest district were in. Sarah's heart raced as the numbers flashed across the screen. It was too close to call. She glanced at Daniel, who gave her an encouraging smile. "We'll know soon," he said quietly. As the night wore on, the numbers slowly started to tilt in Sarah's favor. It wasn't a landslide, but it was enough. Finally, the moment came when the results were official. Sarah had won. The room erupted in cheers and applause, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to fully embrace the celebration just yet. She was overwhelmed with emotion, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had won, not just for herself, but for all the people who believed in her and her vision for the future. "You did it," Daniel said softly, his voice filled with pride. Sarah smiled, but there was a quiet sense of disbelief in her eyes. She had proven herself to the world, but now, the real work was just beginning. The journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but Sarah was no longer afraid. She had fought for this moment, and now, she was ready to face whatever came next. As the celebration continued around her, Sarah stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The city stretched out before her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but Sarah knew one thing. She had earned her place, and she was ready to make the change she had always dreamed of. The days following the election victory were a whirlwind. Sarah found herself thrust into a new world, one where the expectations were higher, the stakes were greater, and the pressure to deliver was overwhelming. As she settled into her new role, the reality of the responsibility she had taken on began to sink in. But even amidst the hustle of her new life, Sarah remained grounded. She was no longer the woman who had been dismissed by the world. She had fought for this, and now she was ready to make the changes she had always dreamed of. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Sarah sat in her office, reflecting on everything she had accomplished. She had achieved more than she had ever thought possible. Yet, there was still so much to be done. She had made promises to the people, and she intended to keep them. As she looked out the window, she couldn't help but think about the journey that had brought her here. From the humble beginnings of her foundation to the hard-fought election campaign, Sarah had come a long way. But she knew that the real work was just beginning. It was one thing to win an election, but it was another thing entirely to change the system from the inside. The weight of the task ahead felt heavy, but Sarah was not one to shy away from a challenge. As she prepared for the first official day in office, she made a silent vow to herself. She would not let the people down. The following morning, Sarah stood in front of a crowd of supporters, ready to officially take her place. The inauguration was a grand affair, but for Sarah, it was just another step in a much larger journey. She had spent so long fighting for change, and now, she was in a position to make that change happen. The ceremony was a blur, but when Sarah finally took the oath of office, she felt the weight of it all. Every promise she had made, every person who had believed in her. She knew that she had a duty to serve. As the day progressed, Sarah quickly found that the political world was more complicated than she had anticipated. There were meetings to attend, policies to review, and decisions to be made, each one more challenging than the last. But Sarah was determined to stay true to her values. She wasn't here to play the political game. She was here to change it. Weeks passed, and slowly but surely, Sarah began to implement the changes she had promised. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, obstacles, and fierce opposition from those who didn't want things to change. But Sarah had never been one to back down from a fight. She pressed forward, determined to make a real difference. And with each step, she gained the trust of the people, proving that she was more than just a figurehead. She was a leader. As Sarah sat at her desk late one evening, reviewing policy proposals, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She had come a long way from the woman who had once been dismissed and underestimated. But now, Sarah knew one thing for certain. She was exactly where she was meant to be.